It is the beginning of the 20th century. The world is getting faster, swifter, and more versatile. It grows merciless towards those who fail to catch up. Martin Eden, a young man from the lower social class, is eager to fight against it with his words, his fearlessness, and his inner force to somehow find his place in this ever-changing society. Martin is a sailor, riding his way into the vast oceans and conquering the hearts of women effortlessly. The action starts when he meets a girl named Margarita at a dance and then spends the night with her on the boat. The girl silently leaves him at night while he's having a dream, getting visited by the vision of his younger self. In the morning, he's awakened by the sound of a man dragging somebody on the platform, bullying and oppressing a young, drunk, and sulky boy. Martin calls him out immediately, demanding that he leave him alone. However, once the man continues beating the youngster, he gets out of the boat, tramples his way toward him, and punches him, saving the kid and showing his important traits, courage and explosiveness. In the next scene, we see him walking with Arturo, the boy he saved, who invites him into his home. Once they arrive, we understand that Arturo is from a wealthy family. Even a maiden is looking at Martin with slight contempt. He gets inside the house and is left alone for a moment in a beautiful, sunny room. He gets a book of poems, flicks through it, and then sees a painting. Martin is quickly captured by it, getting closer and closer to it to the extent that he can't even notice a young, beautiful woman approaching him. He slowly takes a step back and notices her, saying that the painting is almost an illusion as an excuse. The girl introduces herself. She's Elena Orsini, a sister of Arturo. As Martin shakes her hand, his eyes fail to blink, as if she were an illusion too. Elena thanks him for his courage, and they continue their conversation, talking about the book Martin has in his hands. It's Baudelaire, a poet whom Martin doesn't know about. He has no access to such literature or education. However, they still manage to communicate, and we understand that Elena considers boldness a weakness in poetry since she doesn't like most of Baudelaire's work. But Martin is bold, and so he says. At that moment, her mother, Matilda, comes into the room and gets introduced to him. She also thanks him for Arturo and invites him to have lunch together. In the following scene, they are all around the table. Martin looks extremely out of place, chewing loudly and gazing at other people. Matilda starts the conversation. They talk about how he travels from a very young age and how he got a scar on his neck, and eventually, Matilda asks his opinion about education, which Martin has none of. He demonstrates his take on it by taking a piece of bread, dipping a large chunk of it in sauce, and then eating it whole, saying that the bread is education and the sauce is poverty. He's different from them, however, they seem to like him a lot. After lunch, Elena plays the piano for him. He's so astonished by it that he claps before the piece ends, proving that he has no idea what she's playing. Eventually, the visit ends, and he says goodbye to Elena at the door. He half-jokingly says to her that this was the best experience of his life. His eyes, again, don't blink as if he wants to soak up every moment of seeing her. Elena seems to be mystically drawn by his presence too. The differences between them seem to have no effect. And so, Martin leaves and walks the streets of Naples alone, sniffing books and imagining her face. He gets home, looking as if he is in love, and we understand that he stays with his brother-in-law and his sister, since he can't afford a place of his own. The brother-in-law seems to be a despicable person, demanding that Martin works with him in exchange for living with him and bringing in money rather than writing a book. Martin has had enough of this and goes to his room. He starts reading the book Elena gave him and becomes completely absorbed in it, until the morning breaks. Next, he purchases some books at a local bookstand and sees Elena in the street, walking graciously amongst other students. He quickly hides and peeks at her. Next, he prepares himself for another visit. This time he tries to look different, more dignified, and presentable. Flashing through time, we see him sitting on an armchair in a garden while Elena's drawing him. He states that he wants to be more like them and asks how he can do that. Elena seems amused by the sincerity of this question and tells him that he needs to get an education. However, Martin can't pay for his education. Therefore, he needs to do it on his own, and after repeating the question, Elena offers him a grammar book. Martin is vastly grateful and says he'll have much time to read it while traveling. He has to leave soon to return to the sea, to continue his old life. However, suddenly he's extremely motivated to educate himself, to return to a changed man who's more suitable to win the heart of a girl like Elena. Martin meets her father, who thanks him for helping his son earlier, and then Elena leads him to the library. And so, Martin sets off, sailing into the sea. However, his ship gets badly damaged, and his contract is cancelled. He tells Elena in his letter that, back in Naples, he managed to get a job in a steel factory thanks to his friend Nino. He learns a lot and writes poetry that he also sends out to Elena. They are treated miserably and paid poorly there. However, in the conversation with Nino, who's desperate and has nowhere to go after this, Martin says that 1 week is a small price to pay for his future. He has a grand plan, and he tells Elena that he'll tell her when he gets back. Next, Nino gets exhausted from extensive work and asks for rest. This grows into a quarrel, and his supervisor kicks him and Martin out without any pay. This can't happen, and they prepare an ambush after work, taking their money by force and splitting up until they meet again. Martin gets back to Naples, eager to meet Elena and introduce her to his new endeavor. In the following scene, they are together by the fountain. Martin tells her that for months he reflected on his situation, feeling something otherworldly growing inside of him, a creative spirit urging him to become a writer. Elena does not share his enthusiasm, though. Her take is more practical. There are several problems that an upcoming writer faces, and one can't overcome those without a proper education. Martin is burned with passion, thinking that his talent alone can skyrocket his career. However, he appreciates Elena's opinion, so he goes to have a test to enroll in the university. Two women give him a trial, while Martin, a huge athletic man on a small chair, tries to answer very simple questions, but fails. They tell him that he should consider going back to primary school, but even a vision of a fully grown man in a class of small children is terrifying for him. It seems like his goal is about to become a fantasy. However, that day near the dock, he reads that one newspaper is receiving short stories from young authors and paying pretty well. That night Martin writes extensively, fully sinking in words and his creation, his artistic soul getting scorched throughout the night until, in the morning, he gives it to his sister to read. She likes it, but it's too sad. People need laughter and happiness. Nobody will read this. A text about the reality that evokes sadness and grimness. However, that's the feeling he wants to express, and so he will. He buys a typewriter, types his first short story, and sends it to the magazine. In the following scene, he's hanging out with Elena and her family in a floating restaurant. It seems like the waitress here is the girl that Martin met at the beginning of the film. She approaches their table and slows her pace once she notices Martin with them. She receives the order with a face full of slow-burning disappointment and sorrow and leaves. Martin looks indifferent as if he doesn't even know her. However, Elena points out how beautiful she is, but he answers this naive statement with the fact that she's too uneducated to even have a complete conversation with. He continues by saying that he used to be like her, but now he has changed and is separate from that world. This act of putting himself on a pedestal makes us think that he's changing and embarking on a dangerous road of arrogance. Moving forward, he's in a store, going through books, when the seller comes up to him and gives out a beautiful necklace, saying that it's for his fiancée. As Martin thanks him, it becomes obvious that he intends to spend his whole life with Elena. Trying to make himself a proper gentleman for her, he continues reading books, now shifting to Herbert Spencer and others, developing his mind and his understanding of the surrounding universe. Meanwhile, socialism is arriving in Naples too. Martin goes to a protest to see and listen to the raging new philosophy, and sees a man going on stage and, despite his wife's resistance, going against the protesters. He's thrown down from the stage, and Martin, who also doesn't fall for the snare of socialism, helps him get away. He's growing as a writer and as a thinker. However, his texts keep returning from magazines. In the following scene, we understand that his French is getting better as well. He and Elena are walking in nature, and rain is falling on them as they joke about his French accent and look over an eye-catching view. They find shelter away from the rain and talk lightly about the future. Martin has to go to sea again. He has no job here, and Elena offers the help of her father. However, an office job is going to be like a cage for a man like Martin, an untiring soul that needs to be on the move constantly. There's only one thing that holds him back. This unstoppable urge to travel and to see the world. To conquer it is stopped by something. Elena asks what it is, and Martin answers. However, not with words. His gaze is enough for Elena to know the answer, and the two kiss, declare their love and promise each other the world. The day ends and Martin arrives home, where his brother-in-law is strangely happy about something, almost celebrating. He invites Martin to sit down and have a drink and then orders his wife to get something, a reason for the celebration. Martin looks at it. It's yet another of his texts returned from the editorial office. The brother-in-law proceeds by telling him cynically how all this striving is useless and how he must work with him. But Martin will drink poison before he lowers himself like that, and so he says. He gets thrown out of the house, left astray, and without money. He strides about the street and comes across first his brother-in-law, who shouts out from his car mockingly, and then his sister, who secretly gives him money to get by with. After that, Martin decides to retreat to the outskirts. He meets a woman named Maria on the train, a widow with 3 kids. They grow quite fond of each other along the way, telling each other stories briefly, and once they arrive in the town, she gives him a room in his house. A beautiful view is set from his window, a quiet and real place full of real people, and now he can write, throw himself at once into the flames of creative work. Now that his perspective of the world is getting wider and bigger and his thoughts and vocabulary are richer, and his understanding of himself is developed, and his ability to interpret life is awakening. And so he tells all this to Elena in his love letter. He also asks her to wait for 2 years so that he can reach success in his career, and then he'll be Elena's forever. Elena, of course, is ready to give him 2 years and even more. However, she still thinks that he should look for a job that will allow him to earn a living. That evening at supper, Martin tells Maria about his love. They seem to get along very well, talking about ordinary things, their labor and poor pay, and the beauty that lies in the simplicity of life. As it seems, Martin is not completely torn away from the people of the lower class. He likes them, and he feels welcome and comfortable in their house. In the morning, Maria gives him a suit that his husband used to own. She dresses him up well and elegantly, telling him at the end that hopefully, these people will appreciate him. We understand what she meant when, in the next scene, we see him at the party in Elena's garden. Lots of people, all dressed exceptionally, are gathered. Martin walks around the garden and finds Elena. He gives her a necklace that might look a little average for most of the people around, but for them it's flamboyant. They start scanning each other, looking for differences after the last time they met. But this moment is cut short by her mother, who comes by and steals her away, telling her that they have a surprise for her. And so, she is stolen away to take a picture with some men, while a stranger called Gitano Gargiulo approaches him and, after a relatively formal introduction, offers him help since he was once a poor man too. This attitude is of course insulting to Martin, but he contains himself and takes this man's card, only to throw it away afterward. Elena's insistent imploring then leads to Martin being invited to take a photo as well. Mathilda seems not to be very fond of this, though, as she makes Arturo stand between him and Elena. Immediately both understand what's happening, and the rest of the party will feel out of place, not wanted, and Elena will feel guilty. But they smile for the picture nonetheless. The day goes by, the living room is full of people playing a game, while Martin is in another room, unwantedly overhearing a heated conversation between Elena's parents. They're calling him a megalomaniac and saying that to even consider Eden as a partner is mere foolishness on Elena's part. He walks around the house, dumbfounded, searching for someone to talk to, but compared to Maria, the low-class woman, these people seem hard to talk to and even less intellectual. He gets to the living room, where games are being played. There are everybody's things in a hat. Elena takes it out, and the host of the game tells the owner of it to do something if he wants it back. All of a sudden, it's Martin's turn. The host tries to humiliate him, ordering him to let his hand hang above a lit candle for as long as he can. But Martin isn't the kind of man that can be humiliated that easily. As Elena repeatedly tells him to stop it, he recites a poem he wrote about love while burning his hand. This performance leaves everyone speechless. In the next scene, he is about to leave when an elderly man named Russ Brissenden, who was in the living room during the incident, stops him. He seems different from the other people around. In a small conversation, Martin tells him about the poem and his love, and Russ confesses that he's here only to pass time. Martin spends the rest of the night with this mysterious man. They go to a strange place, the kind of place that Martin has never been to and only crazy artists would visit. Russ encourages him to stop writing for the magazine since the magazines only publish the lousy work of lousy artists, and Martin is better than that. In the morning, Russ takes him to another mysterious place that seems like an office for illegally working journalists, who are at the moment investigating a massacre. The wife of a man whose life was taken is here too, and she is telling them important information. Flashing through time, Elena and Martin are in a cinema, watching a lovely romance film. However, in a conversation after the film, Martin tells her that this movie conveyed nothing important, nothing new, and nothing worthwhile. Elena thinks otherwise, and this ordinary disagreement about a movie suddenly becomes a disagreement about his writing. Elena believes there is no hope in them, no light, but Martin knows that there's no light and no hope in his world. He writes what he sees and what needs to be shown, but his lover knows that this way he will never make a living, and therefore they will never be able to marry. These words inspire Martin to do something bold. He grabs Elena's hand and unwillingly takes her to the district of the poor, full of alcoholics, ruined buildings, and that gather around Elena and Martin like flies. Throughout the way, Elena tries to get free for him, telling him that she got the point, and eventually, Martin has enough too. Now Elena knows where Martin's grim stories come from. His visit to the city is over, and Martin returns to the outskirts. Yet another of his stories comes back unanswered while he has to pay his debts, but thanks to his commitments, a handful of coins is all he has. Maybe he will have to give up. He has no food, and he's not created for hunting. So he continues to wear his typewriter and finds a side job working with cattle. But after work, his steps become even more unsteady. His breathing speeds up uncontrollably, and he barely gets home. Martin has a terrible fever. He's on the edge and lucky to have Maria and her kids to treat him. One day, his letter comes, and Maria tries to hide it, but Martin insists that they read it to him. And so, Paulina, Maria's daughter, reads the letters. The first two of those are return pieces of his. However, the third one has only his name written on the envelope. Paulina opens it up and reads out the letter that enlivens Martin in an instant. The magazine El Heroica wants to publish his short story, The Apostate, and even sends the payment of 200 lira. He cannot believe it. Now the road is clear, it's a miracle. Martin's fever promptly goes away, and he celebrates this news with people who are equally happy for him. But something adds to his happiness. Elena arrives in his room alone one day. Martin jumps up from the table like he was thunderstruck and hugs her firmly. It has been a long time since they met each other last, and after all the struggle that followed that day, their previous fight seems so small and insignificant. Martin introduces her to Maria and the kids, who quickly leave them so that they can embrace each other alone. Then Elena tells him the news. She fought with her mother, who thinks that Elena won't ever be happy with Martin, and now she's here with him so that they can prove her wrong at last. They travel back to the city, and Martin shows her his published story. Both are happy that it finally happened. Back in the city, Martin also shows this piece to Russ, who's amazed by the punch that the story delivers and even more amazed by the fact that it got published. He sees Martin as a true artist, someone who shall travel, go about the world, and not be a mere magazine writer to get by with a woman that doesn't appreciate him for who he is. This upsets Martin, and he gets him by the throat, but sheer power can't beat Russ. He then proceeds by saying that Martin must fight for the lower class, for the wretched and the slaves, and that socialism is the only way he can save himself from the inevitable disappointment. Martin doesn't understand what disappointment he's talking about, so Russ takes him somewhere. It's a meeting of socialists. A man is shouting unstoppably from the stage, throwing around the postulates of socialism. Amongst the waving and screaming, Russ encourages Martin to go up on stage and go against these people, argue with them, since he doesn't want socialism, and these people need somebody to argue with. And so, Martin agrees and stands in front of these excited and kindled people, unfearful. He crashes their ideology with philosophical, scientific, evolutionary, and political arguments, articulating his opinions much better than any of the people gathered could. Of course, he is taken down and sent off from the building. On the train, he checks his book and sees money above a note that says, "From Briss, with brotherly love. He'll have a normal life for a little while now." However, when he gets back to his home, he's rejected by the seller, who tells him that he's not welcome here anymore. She shows him the newspaper in which he's portrayed as a socialist leader. So he gets back in the city and, with Briss by his side, ambushes the journalist that was responsible for this lie. They attack him, punish him like some naughty kid, and as he runs away, throwing around threats, Briss starts coughing up blood. Moving forward, Elena is in her room, reading the newspaper, when Martin comes in. Elena is convinced that the article is true, and when Martin tries to prove her otherwise, Elena's father enters with his friend, a judge, and introduces them to Martin. They go on to have supper in the dark room. A political discussion arises from almost nothing, and the judge notices Martin's socialist ideology and talks down on him with an underlying, mocking attitude. Martin is too proud to start justifying his actions against this man, so he attacks his ideology instead, calling him out on his pseudo-individualism. Soon the only one who speaks is Martin. Elena tries to stop his explosive monologue, but to no avail. Martin shames everybody at the table, the wealthy who call forth socialism and who is the cause of it by the name of pseudo-liberalism. Eventually, he storms out of the room and goes home. The next day, he visits Briss, who's bedridden. He whispers to him that he wrote a poem and asks him to read it but not show it to anyone else. Martin then notices a Bible lying on his bedside and realizes that he's about to pass into the other world. In the following scene, Martin calls Elena, apologizing for his actions, but receives a cold rejection. So he goes to her house. A maid blocks his way, telling him that nobody's home and that they left. Then she stops acting and lying and comes out to say the truth. Elena is not for him. After that, Martin stops trying and leaves, terribly upset. Now that he's rejected like that, he rolls the dice and we understand that his actions are going to be thoughtless and hasty. He works so hard, but maybe Briss is right. Maybe he needs somebody who will understand him and appreciate him for who he is. So he returns to where he started. To the girl named Margarita, he goes to her where they first danced and asks her to do it again. A man tries to stop them, but Martin beats him, winning the girl, and they spend time at the beach in harmony. The next day he's in his room when Paulina comes up to him and gives out a letter. One publisher is interested in his writings. It should be great news. In the morning, he decides to visit Briss, but going inside his apartment building, he sees a dreadful picture. The police and ambulance are there. He rushes upstairs and is told that Briss. Martin is struck by this news. He sees a lot of himself in Briss, who didn't take care of himself and was weird, and used to be an alcoholic. Martin doesn't yet drink, but he knows he will start that evening, on a meadow somewhere in the middle of nowhere. He wakes up in the valley, with his soul and his body both intoxicated, drawing deep breaths as if he were drowning and gasping for air. He's eager to follow Briss and die, so that evening he participates in the duel, swinging a rapier clumsily against a man he doesn't even know in front of the people gathered for amusement. But his death is not planned to arrive soon. Nino and a wealthy-looking man named Renato, a publisher, appear from somewhere and stop the show, paying a lot of money as a ransom for Martin's life. They bring him to a house that looks more like a palace. Margarita is there too. They lay Martin on the bed and left him drifting into sleep as the girl kissed her on the cheek. Time flies by. Martin stays at his publisher's house, and his writing is becoming popular. He finally has everything he was striving for, a career as a writer and a vast amount of wealth. But in the next scene, while reading aloud the text of his new book, we see that he looks almost sick. His eyes are the eyes of a crazy man. He's pale as death. Nino and Renato enter the room, and his session is stopped. The publisher tells him that only a few days are left before his trip to the US and that they have arranged a tour for him. However, Martin says that the curtains are closed. He won't go anywhere to become a single bolt of the US marketing. He's an artist and will stay an artist. Renato approaches him and tells him that he used to suffer too. he was like Martin, sorrowful and beaten by the ever-changing life, and eventually, Martin decides to go, but only to let the whole United States know how much he despises them. In the next scene, he's sitting in a car with Nino in the middle of nowhere, waiting for somebody. Another car arrives, and Martin comes out, approaching a man that looks like the socialist leader we saw before. They discuss the war that is upon Italy, and Martin swiftly stops the conversation. He gives him money, making it clear to us that he's taking Briss's words into account and is helping socialists. Now he's nothing like his real self. Moving forward, he's having a meal in a local restaurant with Nino when some socialist, sitting behind them, stands up and makes a toast for Martin. Nino swiftly raises his voice, telling this man that Martin doesn't share any ideas with him. Chaos breaks, and at the end of it, the socialist says that the writers are not going to help in the war, but people like Nino will. And so, Martin just laughs bitterly at this, knowing that nothing he does is appreciated. He turns to alcohol and it seems like he's gone too far in a dark pit of self-loathing. But there's still a place for light in his life. In the next scene, he visits Maria, whose life is better now thanks to Martin's wealth. Maria is concerned, she sees despair in his eyes and asks him to stay with them, like in the good old days. Martin doesn't say anything though, his eyes looking nowhere. The next day, Martin's lying on the sofa like a shell of a man when Margarita enters the room and asks Nino how he is. She goes into Martin's room, and he stands up to follow her. For some time, they talk normally, but very soon, they start fighting. Martin tells her that her love is painful, that she's painful. It's obvious that they despise each other and are only together on the surface. Then his accountant comes up to him, and this conversation is cut short. A car is waiting to take him to a press conference, and he leaves her, never to speak to her again. After a long time, we see Elena going to Martin's press conference. A lot of people are gathered to ask him questions and listen to him speak, but Martin seems to already be fed up. They ask him how he is, and so his heartbreaking monologue starts. He's bad, he doesn't even want to be here to speak with people who only recognize him now, when he's famous, or to the people who say cruel things about him, spreading despicable rumors only to admire him after his death. They don't even understand what he writes, even though it's completely understandable. It all is true, but the people who are gathered consider it to be a joke, an act of a poet, and this attitude of the public makes this speech that much sadder. One of the men from the second row asks him to recite one of his poems, and so he does. He receives some questions from the crowd, and after that, he reveals something to them, that the writer Martin Eden doesn't exist, he's only a product of people's imaginations. He's a sailor, not the legend that everybody wants him to be. In the following scene, Margarita notices Elena standing outside the conference room amongst the crowd, waiting for Martin to come out. Finally, he's out. A group of journalists is gathering around him, and one of them suddenly asks him a question about Russ Brissenden, asking him whether he published his poem under the name of his dead friend. This enraged Martin. He tries to attack him, but the crowd carries him away. Next, his brother-in-law and sister are opening a store. Martin comes out of the car and meets the man, who now tries to win his heart. But Martin is searching for Giuliana, his sister. He finds her inside the store, and they go away to talk. Martin tells her the news, he's going to America, but on the agreement that Giuliana never has to work again. She's happy for him and gives him a task, to dance when he gets to the US. Nino introduces his fiancée to him in the next scene. He's about to get married, and Martin is happy for him. For an unknown reason, he tells him in person to ask Margarita to pack her bags. Martin wants her by his side in America. And so, she arrives on the platform with her bags, waiting for him, while Martin is still in his room, holding a book. Suddenly, Elena enters his room. She looks at him from behind, afraid to face him after all this time. But Martin swiftly jumps up and embraces her, saying only her name. They are sitting on the bed, close to each other, when Elena tells him that they wanted her to marry Judge Mattei. But now that she's here, her family wants Martin as a groom. Everything that he ever wanted is here, however, he knows why they want him now, and this warm reunion turns into something else. Elena says that she has always loved him. But no, Martin knows that Elena is here because of his success, his name, and his wealth. He says this with a bitter smile, while Elena denies it continually, but Martin isn't convinced. In the end, the only thing that she can oppose is his swear word, and this makes Martin laugh. This isn't a laugh of amusement, it's a laugh of deep despair. He continues to laugh and, in the end, gets up, saying that it's too late, and that he's going far away. Elena is desperate as well, to the extent that she's ready to disown her family just to be with him, and be with the love she once betrayed. Martin is listening as his face expresses a great deal of pain, and he tells her that life disgusts him. If there's anything to desire in it, it's her, but he cannot desire her anymore. He's not one of her kind, he'll never be a dog by her side that she can walk. And so, he shouts and screams at her to go away and then looks out the window to see her walking to her mother like it was her funeral. Suddenly, a man appears on the street, walking past their car, holding a book, looking strangely just like Eden. Martin rushes out of the building and chases his younger self, walking firmly up the street and looking back at him from time to time. But Martin can never catch up. In the evening, Eden finds himself on the seashore near some people who are having a feast. One of them approaches him and says that the war has started and leaves. Martin is too tired. The sea is calling him like it always did, urging him to be a sailor like his younger self. He stands up, walks as firmly as he used to years before, approaches the sea, and swims inside without any hesitation, sliding over waves to become a part of it forever.